This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
What's up, people? Welcome back to Rebranding Safety. We're coming to the tail end of our Safety 1 and Safety 2 mini-series. So let's jump into the intro and tell you more about today's guest.
The problem in safety isn't deviation, it's complexity.
Health and safety has gone mad.
Health and safety is trying to unpick having gone mad in the past.
There's no one solution and one problem. The problem is that we are looking for one solution.
Does the structure of the team allow them to flourish?
Feel safe enough to be uncomfortable.
The environment defines our behaviours.
People aren't the problem, they're the solution.
Rebranding Safety, crushing the stereotype. Brought to you by Risk Fluent. Hey everyone, welcome back to Rebranding Safety. We do exactly what we say on the tin. We had to change the perception of health and safety. We do that on YouTube and we do that here on the podcast. So if you're new here and you watch on YouTube, hit subscribe and the bell and all those thingamajiggies. So today's guest, apologies if you can hear some noise. Number one noise is my daughter, if you can see her. Just there, look, in the bottom of your screen, wriggling away. And the wife, bless her, doing some housework, and the dog is also getting annoyed as well. But the podcast goes on. So today's guest is Safety 1 and 2 mini-series. Coming to the end of it now, actually, after today's episode. We've only got 2 more interviews. So what's that? Including this one with 2, 4, 6 episodes of this mini-series left. And then it's over. Mini-series is over. It's been a huge mammoth undertaking, but I think it's been good, actually. It's been good for me anyway. I've learned loads, getting some really good feedback, so hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, let us know. Come and hit us up on any of the social medias, LinkedIn, James McPherson. You can find me, James McPherson. You've got Rebranding Safety on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, and you can find us on Twitter, but Twitter is special. That's Safety Rebranded, as in past tense. So today's guest is Carsten Busch, and today's episode is different. It's called Rebranding Heinrich, or essentially bringing back to Heinrich as originally intended. It's time that you kind of, here, let me put it this way. It's time to don your Indiana Jones cap, put your revolver on your waist and get out your whip, because we're talking to the Indiana Jones of safety. If you know him, you already know him just by that description. We're talking to Carsten Busch. Carsten is a health safety professional, kind of like us, who runs an all-round knowledge transfer consultancy service, he calls it. But he's essentially a myth buster of safety. I kind of call him the police officer of this Safety 1, Safety 2 space. He kind of keeps everyone on track. He doesn't really pick sides. He just makes sure that what we're talking about is correct. We're quoting the right things. And yeah, he kind of just keeps us all on track. And he has done one of the biggest kind of investigations, kind of archaeology digs, so to speak, around Herbert Heinrich. You might recognise the name, Heibert's Triangle, the Domino theory and all that. And actually, he's found out that most of us never really read a word of his work. And he's coming to tell us what Heinrich was about, who he was, and there's a lot of lessons in this conversation around this Safety 1, Safety 2 argument that I think we all need to take away. So, without further ado, we shall jump into the conversation with Carsten. Don't forget to check out next week's episode, where I'll talk a little bit more about this and I'll reflect on what I learned from this episode and from my conversation with Carsten, who is an all-round lovely bloke, by the way. But without further ado, let's jump into my conversation with Carsten.
All right, Carsten, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for coming on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, actually, because I am one of the people, I believe, that talk about Heinrich but actually know little about him. So I'm really interested, and I think this is going to be a good chat. So why don't you start with just giving us an introduction to you first before we go on and talk about Herbert William Heinrich?
Yes, we can do that. My name, Carsten Busch. I am a mechanical engineer by education, and I hated it within the first 3 months. So I was thinking I'm not going to do this the rest of my life, but whatever. Let's see what happens. and something really cool happened. I ended up in a practical year working with safety, which first was very weird because, well, they don't teach us that at school. But I loved it, and so when I graduated, I went looking for jobs in that direction. I was lucky, and I've worked quite a lot in railways, various railway-related companies. Studied safety on the way because I needed to get some professional luggage, of course, and did some law school on the way also. Then I moved to Norway, which is about 11 years ago, to Norwegian Railways. Dabbled a bit in offshore oil and gas, and for the last 5 years now I work for Norwegian Police Directorate. We are the say governing and professional advice body of the whole Norwegian police force.
Wow.
Which is a fascinating field, coming from the very technical railways and oil and gas, and then going over to something that is nearly completely human and building on very much on the knowledge and, well, say resilience of the people who do the job. And it's fascinating, and I had to really, and I'm still having to rethink safety. So that's super cool.
Yeah.
And a few years ago, I decided I needed to well, do something formal about my knowledge, which I had built up, and I enrolled in the Human Factors and System Safety program at Lund University. And I graduated last year, I think, there. And now I'm on the teacher team of that program too. Well, teacher and tutor. I help students getting through the first year.
Cool.
Which is super cool.
Awesome.
And I'm a confessed safety nerd, geek, whatever. Yeah.
I love a confessed safety nerve. I love it. Like the rest of us are secret safety nerves. Like we're
yeah, closet safety nerds. Yeah, I've had my coming out some 15 years ago. So.
How was that conversation with your parents and your family? Just I'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, we knew it all along. And there is this, and we are actually having discussions about it at home sometimes. There's a clear sign when there's on your nightstand when there's a professional safety book and not some crime mystery or something.
Yeah.
And I tend to alternate the two, that I read something professional and then well, a safety book. And my wife sometimes says, how can you relax? It's about statistics. And I say, yeah, but I like reading about statistics.
I'm exactly that exact thing happens to me. I'll read like leadership or safety books or like human resilience or anything, and there's just a massive queue of books now, because I listen to a podcast and someone will say, oh, listen, I've wrote this book, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna buy that book, and I can't keep up with them all, so I'm reading books. But then I think the thing that slows me down is I get to a point where I'm like, I do fancy just a bit of fiction, or do you know what I mean, like a murder mystery, just maybe you know, when you work in safety, do a podcast in safety and then read safety or resilience or something in bed. You do kind of, you know, toss and turn at night, muttering risk assessment and resilience and capacity and
yeah, been there doing that.
Yeah. And my wife says exactly the same thing. How can you relax after you're reading a book like that? And I'm like, I don't know. I think the point is that my brain works so hard whilst I'm doing it that I just kind of doze off.
Yep.
But yeah, that's quite interesting. Like you say, working for the police force, you know, and that shift is quite interesting actually. And I want to get into talking about Heinrich, but I think that I'd be interested in like how you kind of dealt with that shift from, like you say, a real technical, you know, like rail and stuff like that, where your probably main driver is kind of like avoiding the risk, whereas in the police force it's kind of like, we are in the risk, and a lot of the time we're going towards the risk. Our job is to control that risk to protect other people. It's interesting. I've got a member of my wife's family. She's part of the like armed response in the UK, and in Luton, which has a reputation, if you don't know England, but Luton has a reputation for being extremely rough. Well, excuse me, I didn't put my phone on silent. And it's interesting when I talk to her about it, and we say, in my job, I'm trying to get people to avoid risk, or we try and control it as much as we can, and do all that stuff. And her job is, there is a risk, and she's literally going in that direction. How did you find that kind of shift? That must have been a challenge.
Well, now I'm working quite distantly from the frontliners, of course. But I do have contact with them. And at my job interview, this was one of the arguments I had. They asked me for my motivation, why I was applying for the job. And I said, what fascinates me is the uncertainty and how you deal with uncertainty. Because in railways where I worked at the time, you have this job in the middle of the night somewhere on the tracks, and sure, there's some uncertainty. What's the weather going to be like? But the big risks you can rather control. You just shut down the electric current, you stop the trains, and well, that's the main stuff. And then you get some surprises. Maybe there can be a landslide, but yeah, okay. But if the police is called upon to fix something in the middle of the night, there's noise from the neighbor house. Well,
could be walking.
Is it a party going on? Are they playing the TV too loud? Is somebody beating up his wife? Is there a burglary? So it's massive uncertainty, and how do you deal with that? And most of the time, they do so very successful. So there's this built-in resilience or capacity to handle that wide range of variation, and then that's really fascinating. And I still haven't found the real answer, but. One factor in it is the training. We have this training facility for people working with what shall I say, drug plantars, and where they grow marijuana and stuff. Yeah. And they actually train people for the situations they will go into. So look for the CO2 meters outside the door, because then you know there's low oxygen. Watch the door handle, because they're often booby trapped, not because of the police, but because of competition. And so on and so on. And that's really cool to see how they prepare for, well, the unexpected. They create the situations, and they train as lifelike as possible, just to build up that capacity to handle the variation and all the weird stuff they meet.
Yeah, I remember when I was training a long time ago to become a aviation security trainer, which was basically just training people about terrorism, and so that we can spot terrorism, basically. And I was becoming a trainer for that, which was accredited by the Civil Aviation Authority. But we had to do what was the coolest training I've ever done in my entire life. There was, I think it was 2 days of really intense, hard theory, but day 3 made it all worth it, because we went to the local police firing range and training center, and basically we just watched this guy blow stuff up. Like, they had like airplane doors, and they were like, this is what would have happened if the shoe bomber wasn't caught, and this is the kind of bomb that they were using. And and they showed us how it works, and they just set the bombs off, and it was like, blimey, like, as a typical lad like I am, like, it's like, whoa, yeah, this is cool. But then just behind us, I couldn't pay attention because just behind us they had so a couple of police officers, like plainclothes officers that were training to do like a car bust, like trying to get, I don't know, someone out of a car. And you're spot on in what you're saying, that they do it so lifelike. We were watching them whilst we were having lunch, and there's no like messing around or like joking. Like they're shouting, they're screaming like they would normally do. Like, get out of their car! They take it so seriously. There's no like, ooh, giggle, and then go. It's like you'd think it was pure lifelike, which it was just fascinating to watch. Great day all round. Anyway, we digress massively. So basically you've done a hell of a lot of research into how many times have I said his name? I go to say it now on the recording and it's wrong. Herbert William Heinrich, which personally I love his name because I'm a big fan of alliteration. I really like we got my first child on the way, and I said to the wife, there's only one rule that I would like to do with our child's name. You call it whatever, but it has to be an M so that it alliterates with our last name. Then I can call it Eminem.
McPherson.
Yeah, Mac. I like that. That's a new option, Mac. McPherson. I like that. So yeah. Anyway, so I'd be interested in talking me through the decision, why you kind of did all that research. What kind of drew you to do some research around Heinrich?
Yes. Well, the origins go a while back when I switched jobs. I went from one railway company in the Netherlands to the Railway Authority. What are they now in the UK? I think it's a Network Rail.
Network Rail, yeah.
Yeah. It's ProRail in the Netherlands. I went to work for the safety staff there, and I think I was quite a good safety professional when I joined, with a lot of practical experience from workshops and out on railroad shifting yards and so on. And then I came in an environment that was super inspiring to work in, because suddenly there were all these people that were on my level, and it was just fascinating to discuss safety theory over the office table or on the lunch. And I decided I had to step up my game a bit to keep up with my colleagues, and I went and bought all these books from Charles Perrow, Normal Accidents, and a lot of James Reason, Human Error, and I think at the time the organizational accident book had just been published. So I bought all that stuff, and while I was on Amazon, I came across one of Heinrich's books. And I thought I have to buy that too, because it's one of the foundational texts. And besides, we were at the time building a safety information system, and we were actually looking at this triangle idea. And well, can we find precursors in all the data we have, and to what the top events will they? So I bought the book, and then I read everything. But the Heinrich books, I bought actually 2 different editions at the time. They were just on the shelf because, well, they were cool to have, but, well, didn't really feel like reading. Fast forward some 5, 6, 7 years, I think. I ended up on LinkedIn and in all these cool safety groups, and there were a lot of discussions on Heinrich also. Like, what's your opinion on the 88% of all accidents are due to human failure, etc., etc., all those discussions. And I noticed one thing, and it was people who discussed Heinrich they didn't read Heinrich at all. Mm-hmm. So I decided, before I join in these discussions, let me read a bit. So I read those 2 books, made a kind of summary for myself, and then I took part. And doing that exercise, it really confirmed my suspicion. People who were discussing Heinrich, they didn't have a clue what Heinrich really had written. They just got the headline message, like 88% of all accidents are caused by human error, but not the nitty-gritty details or the nuances and the wider message. And I think that's a bit the start for me of thinking critically in safety, and also later doing a book on safety myths, where I address some of those superficial knowledge versus, what is there really out there? Yeah, well, that's my first encounter with Heinrich. Then it became silent for some years because I was busy with other stuff, among other things, writing the mid book. And then I enrolled at Lund University, and over time you have to decide what I'm going to do my thesis about. And during the course, I had already injected some comments because, there was this typical criticism of Heinrich, because Lund is really one of the places that's on the forefront of new thinking in safety. The course was started by Sidney Dekker back, many years ago. And there's very big in the resilient engineering thinking, etc., but in a critical way. And some of the courses I had already injected some comments. Okay, this is the popular understanding of Heinrich, but this is not what he really said, because something. Yeah. And so at some point, my mentor, Johan Bergström, he said, why don't you do your thesis about Heinrich? And I had some other plans, actually. I was going to do something with police and just culture and something like that. That was my original idea. But I warmed to the idea, and I thought, well, it might be really fun to do something with Heinrich. For example, exploring some of the questions that I had, like why was he focusing on direct cause, which from today's perspective doesn't make sense at all. Or why did he focus on the human so much, if he did so? And eventually it became that subject then. And in my thesis, I then decided to contrast how New View talks about Heinrich, what Heinrich actually did, and why it did make sense for both parties to do what they did, which is the subject of my thesis in a nutshell. And then, having done that, I decided to write a book about Heinrich and his work, just to make it available for the others than myself. Heinrich's work, it's very hard to find primary sources. His books have been out of print for 40, 50 years. Some of his papers and one or two of his management books can be found online in online libraries, but he has written so much more, which is totally unavailable, but it's foundational for our profession. And I think it's important that more people see a bit what he actually did right, and then maybe make up their mind, and not just, copy something that Dekker said, or that Geller said, or whoever said, or what Carsten said, of course. Because I can be wrong.
Yeah, we'll all be misquoting you in a couple of years. You watch.
Yeah.
Have you always been quite like a critical thinker? Like, have you always been that way inclined, like to not join the argument, read the book first, or is that like that? That's quite interesting, because I think that's a rarity to be like that.
Yeah, I'm not sure when it started.
Interesting.
But I think the Heinrich experience was a real tipping point for me. But I think I actually, it may be one of my mentors at the workshop who helped me doing my bachelor thesis for the safety study. actually helped me think very critically about the management program we were enrolling at the time.
Because it's easy
which
to get
was very much following the regulations, and I'm now really thinking aloud. I think that there may be something there that Albert, what's his name, taught me to think very differently, and he helped me to see, okay, what we're doing is very much a bureaucratic exercise, and let's not do that, but let's do something that actually helps our middle managers and people on the work floor to do a good job and to make their everyday safer, and not
definitely.
just fill, well,
Folders.
what's it, 30 inches, 20 inches of paper.
Definitely.
Because the head office said so.
Yeah, interesting. Let's we could end up going down the rabbit hole if we get onto that, especially with me, because I get my soapbox there. Let's why don't you give us an introduction into the actual man that was Herbert William Heinrich, because I think to your point, like we take all those helicopter views, those one-liner quotes, those things that we all know that we'll probably discuss later, like the triangle and the dominoes and the 88% human errors and all that, but we don't really know the man at all. So I'd be interested in just a bit of an insight into him.
Yeah, and that was one of the important undertakings in my research, actually, because I planned to find out why it made sense to him. And one thing you can do normally is go to people and say, well, James, why did you do this? Why did you write it like this? And then you are probably going to rationalize what you're, and then we have some proxy of what you were thinking. That's not possible with Heinrich, of course, because he's been dead since 1962. And, well, we're in safety and science and not in seances and stuff like that. So what I try to get as close as possible to the man by trying to understand who was he, what did he do, where did he come from, and so I reached out to some people. One of those is Paul Zwiester. He was, because he's retired now, connected to Delft University in the Netherlands, and he has done quite some good work with a couple of colleagues on safety history. Under his leadership, I would say, this group has written some great papers in a safety science journal. And they will come with a book, I think, early next year about the history of safety. Highly recommend it. It's out in Dutch already, last year published, and I read the Dutch version, and I'm now doing an English version for Routledge. So they did some great work, and they were able to provide me with some of Heinrich's papers, which they had managed to get hold on during their work. In addition, I tried to find all the various editions of his book, because they differ from edition to edition. And after being in contact with Paul at Delft University, I also contacted Travelers Insurance, which had been Heinrich's employer in over 40 years. And I asked them, do you by any chance have a biography of one of your most famous employees, because I'm going to do such and so. And they replied quite promptly and very enthusiastically. I was in contact with the head of their archive, Mary Beth Davidson. And well, as things go, they did have a quite extensive biography, not an official one, but written by by one of their former employees who had worked with Heinrich between 1935 till Heinrich's retirement in the 60s.
Cool.
And that was quite cool to get really rich information. And she said, I can also get you some of his papers, because he published a lot in a journal we published back in the days. Here's also the address of one of our former employees. He's retired now, but he actually interviewed the guy who wrote the biography, and he may be able to give you more information.
Wow.
So I got in contact with him, another Bill, and I really got a world of information there. I got original notes by Heinrich, where his first speech, for example, which was typed out and with some comments in writing, and
Wow.
and some meeting notes of meetings and original papers. And so I managed to do some good safety archaeology. And on the way, I found also a bit then about Heinrich the person, because they had this in-house magazine for employees, and there were some small articles of social activities and so on.
Okay.
And of course, I did some digging on sites like ancestry.com and the like, to just find out the basic data. When was he born? Who was he married to? Who were his parents, etc. So all this to get a picture of who was this guy, what did he do, how did he react. I also went on newspaper.com, found all the article clippings, all the newspaper clippings from Hartford Courant, for example, where he sometimes wrote letters to the editor or did some proposal which made the newspaper. And that's quite cool to see a person from many sides, and not just the images that we all know, the triangle, the domino, etc.
Did anyone survive him? Did he have any family? Did he?
Yes, his wife survived him. And a daughter who probably died in the 2000s, but I haven't been able to trace back where they are, or if he had any grandchildren, which is really a shame, because I would have loved to get in touch with them.
Yeah, that would have been amazing.
But somewhere these internet databases are great, but they stop someplace, and then I just didn't have the time and resources to go and apply to some civil authority, and can you find for me, and all that.
Cool. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. It's something I really would have liked to do, but
it would have been fascinating.
It's a master thesis.
I'm just here because there's a whole profession that absolutely slag off your great granddad's work, and I'm trying to work out if he was really bad or actually was he any good. Would you mind a chat?
Yeah. I did actually track down one of his associates, the son of his son, and got a good conversation, but he didn't know anything about Heinrich, regrettably. Yeah. Anyway, this was a very long introduction. Why I wanted to dive this deeply into the man's life, just to get to know and understand him a bit, to be a bit more comfortable, to make some assumptions about why things might make sense for him. Well, Heinrich, in a nutshell, he was born in, and now I have to be very careful. Let me just look it up. 1891, I think it was. Oh dear. I have the manuscript of my book lying around here, but it's 18 86. I went for the wrong date. It was one of the big questions at the start of my research. When was he born? Because I found conflicting sources.
Oh, wow.
But this Bill, the former Bill Lischeit, the former employee from Travelers, he actually went to the cemetery and took a photograph of Heinrich's headstone and said,
Wow.
well, here's the date.
Jesus.
Yeah, so 86. He was born son of German immigrants who had come to America 10 years before, I think. And he went through no special education, like many people at the time. He just stopped working after basic school, and he got into engineering. He sailed a bit. He worked for the Navy, and at some point, someone encouraged him to apply at the insurance company, one of the biggest, Travelers Insurance, and become a safety engineer. First, boiler inspection, because steam boilers at the time, it's one of the most dangerous objects apart from explosives. And well, in 1913 he became a boiler inspector for them, and that's, we could say, his real start in safety. Served in the Navy during World War I, just a bit at the end. Went back to the Travelers after the war, and got into a management role there for the inspection department, or part of the inspection department. And that's when you see really that he's had his formative years, and he picks up well, stuff, and he starts giving presentations on safety organization, safety management, we would say today, and accident prevention, because that's the thing. And that's one of the really interesting things for us today, I think, to consider the role of insurance, which was quite different at the time from how we experience insurance as, well, ordinary people. Because we pay insurance, and then if something happens to your car, you hope you get some money back. But often it's a battle against bureaucracy, and they don't want to, and whatever. They're just in it for the money. That's how we see insurance at the time. That's of course one part of it. Insurance companies were for the money. They wanted to make money, but they actually had a super active role in preventing accidents and improving workplace safety at the time.
Oh, wow.
For their own good, but also for the good of the people, the workers, and the employers that had their insurance for the workers' compensation with these companies. So these companies, and I think Travelers was really in the fore there. They were very active, sharing safety information, getting out standards, sharing safe practices, and advising the Travelers. That they had a safety engineer corps of, I think, 450 or something, which they send out doing inspection and advising at well, plants, workshops, etc., to improve safety. So Heinrich was one of them. He became also a manager of some of these safety engineers. And at some point, he started doing some research studies. And the first thing he came with was a ratio for hidden cost. Because if an accident happened, there was direct cost, the medical treatment, the work hours lost, etc. But he said there's a lot of other costs attached also, because other people stop working. You have to hire new people. You have to train people. There's a lot of production, blah blah blah. And on average, they calculated it's 1 to 4, and in some industries like construction, probably even higher. And that was his breakthrough message, which probably has done a lot of good for safety, because this was an easy to remember number, which people had been waiting for. How do we convince managers to invest in safety? This was actually the precursor to if you think safety is expensive by an accident. They now could put a number to it. If James doesn't come to his work, okay, so it costs you 2 days time, calculate and do it times 5, because that's the real cost. Oh, that's a lot of money. Well, maybe we should buy this, make this guarding or whatever. So yeah, that's what really got him going. He made, I think even made some headlines. He made national paper with it. Wow. Even though it wasn't new at the time. There were many others who had proposed something similar, but well, he put a number to it based on something. We just have to trust him that well, how he did it was okay. But yeah, he gave people something, safety people something they had been waiting for. A very convincing argument. And I think on the back of that success, he went to do other studies. And then the next study was what causes most accidents. And there comes the infamous 88%, where his people sat and took tens of thousands of accident reports, went through them, and decided, was this caused by human cause or machine or physical cause, or was it a freak accident that couldn't be prevented? And well, that's the ratio: 2% non-preventable, 10 physical factors, and original. This is quite interesting. They said 88% are causes of a supervisory nature. They pointed first at the supervisor, because they said supervisors, they have the ability to control their people, facilitate their people. So we think they should be called supervisory then. And on the back of that study, they came up with what we now know as the safety pyramid, accident pyramid, accident ratio. Yeah, and well, those are some of his really foundational things which he did within a very short time. Between the hidden accident and the pyramid, there's 2-3 years. 1926 to 1929. Then in 31, he wrote his famous book, Industrial Accident Prevention, which collects all these ideas and adds 100 pages of guarding and illumination and other stuff, practical safety stuff, some management, some psychology. And he would rewrite the book or update the book every 10 years, about 41, 50, 59, there are new editions. And in between, he worked especially a lot on managers. And I would say Heinrich, he wasn't as much a safety professional. He was maybe more a management advisor, management consultant. That's what you see if you read Industrial Accident Prevention, his famous book. We start reading it as a safety book, and there's a lot of safety in it, but it's firstly addressed to top managers. He says so in his book, and it's mostly a management book. How can you manage safety and do it in a practical way, in a fact-based way? And that's the book. So it's not as much how to do safety, but it's how to manage safety and your other stuff too.
Yeah.
That's one of his other big messages: integrate safety with all the other stuff you do, because you're a good manager already. Just apply all these things you know to safety, and you will actually create a, which sounds like a very new view safety, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so he did this. He made this book. He did a lot of other stuff. During World War II, he came really into the management business, because the Department of Labor at the time said foremen, supervisors, they are really the key persons. They're the persons between top management and the workforce, and they have to make workplaces safe and keep them safe, because an hour lost is an hour not having production for the war efforts. And this was then framed also in, there's quite some interesting literature from the time where an accident is framed as a well, involuntary sabotage. So it's as blaming as stuff gets. If you have an accident, you're not a patriot. Stuff like that. Yeah, well, I'm so. But so management was really in the focus, and Heinrich started doing during the 40s. You see, he's mainly busy with the management work. He did, and I didn't know this before I started. I think few people know this. He didn't only write industrial accident prevention, his known book. He also did 3 management books. Dedicated to first-line managers, how they can manage in a practical way safety and production. He still has the safety background, but he applies the principles also to production. And one of the things he writes is many first-line managers, and I think this is also something that's still true today. A lot of first-line managers get their job, but then it's okay, now you're responsible, good luck. And he said that we have to educate these people, and we have to educate them in their language and stuff they understand, and we have to give them tools to do the job we expect them to do, because it's, and now I'm paraphrasing, it's just not fair that we give them that responsibility and hold them accountable, but don't actually prepare them to do the job. So that was his mission during the 40s. And then, well, in the 50s, he integrated his former work from industrial accident prevention with the management work. And his 1950 edition of industrial accident prevention opens quite cool with a picture, which is a ladder, 5-step ladder, which pictures, visualizes how he sees safety management. It's based on some foundation, mission, vision, that kind of stuff. And then he has kind of, after having the formal pieces in place, safety organization, management responsibility, etc., he builds kind of a plan to check act, not a cycle, but a step ladder to get over a wall or whatever it stands against.
Wow.
To go up. He was really good with visuals in some way.
Do you think that's what made him stand out from? Because you alluded that there was people before him, but you know, is that what makes him get on the national papers and things like that? That he wrote it in a way that everybody could understand a bit more than the people before him.
I think that's part of it. Yes. And it's one of the things I think we can learn from Heinrich. Whatever we think about his ideas and the way he phrased his work, I think he did some things that we really can follow as where he's a good example for us how we can do things. He And we can criticize him, of course, for simplifying stuff. But we have to keep in mind his audience, managers, busy people, many other objectives, and they have also to do safety. So he gave them some easy to remember principles or axioms or checklists like stuff. 4-step models. If you have a problem, you have the will to approach it. Then you have to find the facts. Then you have to identify the problem, find a good measure, and follow up that you apply it. That's in a nutshell his safety accident prevention principles. And stuff like that. So for managers, really easy tools. Then he has the eye candy. The pictures, which dominoes. If you see a line of dominoes, it's a very easy metaphor for cause and effect thinking, and we can criticize, and we will in a moment. But it's a good metaphor for people who are not in cause and effect thinking. Okay, if this topples, the neck toppled. You get that? Okay, that's like an accident, a simple accident. And you have the triangle, which shows some relation, etc., etc., and a step ladder, then, which is not one of his more known, but well, it's one of his, I think, really good metaphors. And also the numbers, I think, they're really important because many of his core messages came with ratios, which are really easy to remember and which anchor in the message. If he spoke about the triangle, he always mentioned the 129, 330, which is a number sequence that is, well, too neat to be true, really, but okay, it's an average. So, but because of the numbers, you never forget them, and you always think, okay, that's the big stuff can be caused by small stuff, etc. 1 to 4 for costs and 88%.
Because it's kind of like that was his. That was what kind of threw him into the limelight and got him. That made him so popular. But in a way, it's the same kind of thing that's caused the problems now, isn't it? Because in a way, we just talk about pictures and the numbers, which are the things that are easy to remember. There's not a lot of context on it, which I think we'll come on to. But it's just interesting that the thing that made him so successful is how he communicated it so simple to the right audience, you know, management and stuff like that. I think we all do that as safety professionals. We can talk in big phrases and talk about research and all these big kind of articles, but then how do we communicate that to the board, to management? We try and, for lack of a better phrase, kind of dumb it down. And I don't mean that the board is dumb, but we kind of communicate in their language. And ultimately, that's the thing that's kind of come and bit him in the metaphorical butt, really, which is just fascinating.
It does, and you see it with any popular tool, 5Y, which is, you could say, it's a descendant of the dominoes. It's too simple for real stuff, but it's perfect for simple problem solving, and that's what it was intended for. And then Swiss cheese is probably the most famous example of stuff. Well, people just reduce it to those 5 slices of cheese and ignore all the text that's around it, and that describes the really nitty-gritty details of the holes moving over the cheese and opening and closing, and which says something about the dynamics. But we just see the slices in line, and then we think, okay, that's a very linear model of barriers. It is in part, but there's also a lot of dynamics. So actually, there's quite some complexity caught into that metaphor.
Wow, it's fascinating. So let's so we've alluded to it a couple of times, but let's kind of get into a couple of his examples. I think the triangle, I think, would be a good place to start. Would you agree? Like, so
also the most difficult. So we have to say that we only can touch upon it here because
We
It's
could
a
be here for
massive
days.
subject.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We need a mini series just on Heinrich.
Yeah.
So, okay, a brief kind of as brief as you can. What is the triangle? I know we've kind of just touched on it, but just kind of what it is, or what he kind of what you believe it should have been, and then kind of why we criticize it, and then after that, I suppose we'll chat it out as to whether we think the criticism is fair, unfair, and so on.
Yeah. Well, in its most simple form, I would say the accident ratio, or the that's how he called it. He never called it triangle or the pyramid or the iceberg that were the people after him. But the triangle, in its most easy form, it's an illustration for when something happens and you say, "Oh shit, that could have been worse." That's what the triangle is about. Big stuff or small stuff has often the potential to become something much worse. But, and this is more or less how we said it, commonly we only investigate when something bad happens.
Right.
So we don't do an investigation if we just overfill our pressure vessel and everything goes fine and we run production. But if that pressure vessel overflows and we get some kind of combustion and explosion and half of the refinery disappears, then we have a national investigation board that starts looking at what happened here.
Interesting.
He said, what we actually do is deprive ourselves of a lot of opportunities to learn. We could have done this earlier and thought about, well, okay, this went just right. What could have been? How did that come, and what can we do to prevent it from becoming worse? So I think at the time I found very few authors at the time, because I read a lot of his contemporary authors and the people that he lists in his bibliography that probably influenced him. There are very few who speak of this kind of thinking, of thinking about potential in events and acting on weaker signals than the injury. He speaks mostly of injuries because he was very on an occupational side. He says that we investigate an injury and then we do something. Why don't we start earlier? All the weak signals, the conditions or the acts that come before the big thing happens, or the big consequence manifests itself.
That's interesting, because the way you describe that, the kind of other examples so when you're describing it, I'm thinking of in Sidney Decker's book, in Field Guide to Human Errors, I think it is, where he has the X and the Y axes, and then the wavy lines going up and down, and then a line along the top that basically says once you cross this line, that's a serious accident. But what we don't see is that wavy line is us making mistakes, every single day. But we're not crossing the line. We're coming extremely close to it, but we're not crossing it. And you've got Eric's version of that, where the events go to both sides, and it's success and failure and so on, and they're in the middle. And it sounds extremely similar to those two ways of thinking. Wow, but that's not how we talk about it, is it? We don't talk about the triangle like that.
It's not, because we don't talk about Heinrich's version at all, I think.
Wow.
We see a triangle and then we attribute it to Heinrich because he was the first to come with the idea. But all the criticism that comes now, which then is directed towards Heinrich, is actually about the misapplications that have come all the years after Heinrich. and the various misuses and confusions about the subject.
So a lot of the criticism
Heinrich was actually sorry.
Go on. No, you go.
Yeah, I was saying Heinrich was actually already aware of some of the confusions, because in the last edition of his book, which he ordered, he says something about misdirections, and he stresses, for example, the fact that the numbers 129, 330, or 129, 300, that's just an average, and it doesn't apply to all cases, and there will be variations, which he illustrates with a lot of examples, by the way.
That's fascinating. So he even predicted our stupidity in safety professionals. He even predicted that we were gonna talk about this and criticize his work from a helicopter view. That's interesting.
Yeah. It doesn't go really deep, but there are some real confusions, and one of the problem is, for example, that people talk about the ratio as if it is a law of nature. I've actually been in a meeting, and I think I write about it in Safety Mid 101, where we were with a group of, I think it was railway people, and one guy, and luckily I don't remember who it is or what country he was from, he stood up and he said, I'm sure we have underreporting. I thought, no, we too, so whatever. Try to do something about it, and most of all, live with it. But he said, because our numbers don't match up with the safety triangle. And I thought, oh my God. So you really believe that for every big accident, you have to have 300 near misses?
Yeah.
Amazing. And there's been a lot of research into various sectors and also countries, but they try to replicate and find different ratios, and that makes sense because it's specific. It depends on the scenario and the circumstances and whatever. And the numbers don't matter at all. The numbers are just to anchor in the message. I think
just an illustration.
It's an illustration of, and I think what's his name, McKinnon. I think he wrote it very nicely, and he says it's not the numbers, but it's a few more, many less few. That's it. There are many near misses. There are a bit more, minor accidents, first help, etc. There are very few, luckily, very few serious injuries. And that's, I think, but it's not as sketchy to say many less few. It's easier to say 329 1 because that sounds like science. It's a number. Wow.
Like when we've had 339 near misses, everyone's like walking around like just waiting to die. Like one of us is going to die now.
That's the next misinterpretation, that people think there's something predictive. Oh, we've had 2,000 near misses, so one of these days somebody's going to die.
Yeah.
No, because you don't know your ratio.
Yeah.
You can do it for a light bulb probably, because a light bulb will go within so many times switched on and off, because the factories test them for that. But you can do it for human interaction and all that complex stuff.
Is it kind of a problem that we kind of saw that they were all connected? So we would, so for example, like you were saying, a near miss may be that we were overfilling something, or I don't know, it might be that this one time we were going into a confined space, we forgot to test the atmosphere, but that time it was fine. You know, nothing happened. That's I feel like that's what it's trying to tell us. Is just because at that time it was fine, how many more times is that near miss happening, and then that one time it won't be fine is when it's going to happen. And I think that I felt like the problem is that we felt like, say, slips and trips were connected to confined space, for example, or working at height. We're saying, oh, if we have 6,000, 4,000, whatever, based on the ratio, near slips, we're gonna have a death working at height. And it's like they're completely disconnected in a way. Like we took it as gospel to say that all of these near misses are all going to indicate that somewhere in the business we're going to have a fatality. And then that kind of, I suppose that brings it to kind of say, like, maybe Todd Conkin's criticism, where it's like that doesn't indicate fatalities because it's like a completely different area. Like, we need to focus on the big stuff and not the little stuff. I feel like that's where our misinterpretation was, that we thought this stuff was directly connected.
There are a lot of companies and also regulators and so on that have constructed triangles where they mesh everything together. Heinrich, he says quite explicitly, this is an average. People tend to forget it, but he says this is an average of the 129, 300 is an average of 50,000 cases, I think.
Right.
And then he gives a number of examples of the cases that he bases his this average on. And and you see he has separate ratios inside those cases. Because there's, for example, one of the things I remember is there's a worker at crossing railroad tracks on the way to his job, and he does this for 3 years or something, and then he gets hit by a train. And he's not dead, I think, but he's severely injured. And he said this was then 1 to some thousand ratio, and then he has some other cases with other ratios. So he describes them in his examples as scenario specific, and then he makes an average of those specific cases. What a lot of people and regulators and organizations do, they mesh all their accidents and incidents together into one big pyramid. Frank Bird, one of the people who came with new triangles, I think he doesn't present any specific cases. He just presents his new pyramid, and then says it's based on, I don't know, 1.7 million cases or something. And in the UK, the HSE has for some years also published the ratios for work accidents in the UK, and they just mesh everything together on the consequence, and then they get a 1 to something to 70 ratio. And that's okay if you want to use it as some kind of a benchmarking. How did we do this year and next year? But it doesn't say a thing predictively, because you've mixed so many scenarios that it has lost all meaning. And that's the example from Todd, who says ankle sprains don't prevent a blowout, because it would really be a freak accident where an ankle sprain or somebody slipping triggers a well to blow out. I can't imagine it even. But slipping does, of course, if you do something about the slipping, you can prevent a fatality from somebody falling down a stair or hitting his head really ugly on a sharp object that's in the neighborhood. But if you want to look at the well blowout, you have to look at how does this blowout preventer work, and are there any leakage problems? And Deepwater Horizon, they did have a lot of weak signals, I think.
So it's kind of like, so as I kind of interpret it, the Heinrich originally intended it to try and say that there's a ratio for each, let's say risk. So each kind of risk area, whether it's like blowout, working at height, confined space, slips and trips, cuts and bruises, whatever, there's each one of those essentially could have a ratio, but it will all be completely different. So it's kind of like, the problem is that we thought that it was one ratio or one triangle for our entire safety system, our entire business, but actually it should have been a series of different ratios throughout our entire business. And not to say that it would have then been predictive, but it would have been probably like indicative or like indicators, like you say. Is
that the precursors or the weak signals or the near misses become some kind of a predictive of a big stuff that might happen, and then you have, of course, to decide shall I do something about it or not, because, well, paper cut in a copy room, yeah, sure, somebody can die if it gets infected and blood poisoning and blah blah blah, but really,
but that doesn't indicate that someone's going to fall off the roof next week.
No,
they're two completely separate ratios to
unless, of course, you cut your finger on the risk assessment and he doesn't get it, and that still would be a freak accident.
Oh, please tell me there's an accident report out there that somewhere says that. Why didn't you read the risk assessment? Well, the safety guy was dropping it off but cut his finger on it.
It got all bleedy and we couldn't read it. Yeah. The entire matrix was blood red, so we didn't know what to do. But the fun thing is, I don't have it documented, but I had once a discussion with someone, and I said, well, it was a real serious process accident, and I said, well, incidents in the kitchen aren't predictive of that. And he actually had an example from somewhere where something in the kitchen happened which triggered something else on a ship, I think. So yeah.
Wow. I feel like, you know, when I go on Ron Gantt's calls quite a lot, and I really like the way that Ron Gantt talks about it. And I say that, and I know you know, this is, a lot of people kind of say this, but you know, he always says that, you know, the problem is that it's complex, and that I feel like that the root cause of the problem with the kind of conversation that we're having around Heinrich and criticizing his work is that not just safety professionals, but businesses and you know what, probably even societies looking for a simple solution. We're looking for a one answer to everything. Look at the way we try to lose weight and diet. You know, we're all looking for that pill that we can take every morning that just turns us into Zac Efron, or do you know what I mean? And I think we're doing exactly the same in the safety world. Maybe even doing it with safety 1 and safety 2 now. We're just like, oh, boom, safety 2 is the answer. Off we go. Let's jump on this coach. And I feel like that is like one of our biggest problems here.
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting.
Safety is hard work, and I really love, I don't know if you know the quote by James Reason. It's from his book, The Human Contribution, at the end, where he says that safety is a guerrilla war. And in the end, you're probably going to lose it because of entropy. Something I'm paraphrasing a bit. Yeah, and I have that printed out, and it's in my office on the wall. And yeah,
I like that.
It makes one very humble about what we are doing.
Yeah.
And one shouldn't really. You can, of course, read it in a very fatalist way and say, okay, so no, why should we bother then? But I think it's rather encouragement to try as hard as you can, and you know,
what book was
try
that?
anyway, even though you know you're going to lose.
Yeah. What book was that?
We're trying anyway to make it as good as. Sorry, what?
So what I missed what he's got more than one book, hasn't he, James Reason? I just wonder what book was that.
Yeah, he's got something like 10. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But it's from the Human Contribution.
Human Contribution. Cool.
I will mail it to you.
Cool.
The quote.
That's Andrews. Right, cool. Okay, let's. I feel like we've hashed a triangle out. I would summarize that the criticism that we give the triangle is in a way not fair, but it is fair to the current interpretation of the triangle. But the problem is how we interpret the triangle. Would you agree?
Yes, I fully agree, and I want to add one thing. And when Heinrich spoke of the triangle, he speaks of it in terms of an opportunity. It's a metaphor for an opportunity. Something small happens, and you have the opportunity to do something to prevent worse. And it's your choice whether you take that opportunity or not. And of course, you have to choose between various opportunities. So pick your opportunities wisely. But that's his main message, which is always forgotten, I think.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah, I like that also, and it links also very nicely to Eric Holnagel's latest book, where he, around page 45, I think it is, where he talks about learning opportunities. And to me, he phrases the triangle in an other way, and then he has also this picture with the x and a y axis, and if you look at it, it looks actually what is drawn in a triangle that is tilted into the axis. Yeah.
That's awesome. You should just like turn it so it looks like a triangle, take a picture and send it to Eric. And be like, I think you copied this off Heinrich.
I think he knows. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's because there's so much I want to discuss here, but like I feel like we've smashed the triangle out, and like you say, I feel we could probably talk about this all day. But let's go on to the domino, which I think is another interesting theory.
Yeah.
So could you give us like the same thing, really? Like give us an introduction as to what the domino theory is, and then from there we'll get into.
Yeah, the domino theory, as we call it, Heinrich didn't. He called it the accident sequence. It's actually one of the, and probably the first real accident model that was created. Heinrich came with it in 1934. He was not really the one who, well, he invented the metaphor, I think, and connected it to safety, to accidents. He was very much inspired in his thinking here by a guy who was quite famous before the World War in US safety. That's Louis Dubois. He was the safety manager of DuPont, the first safety director, I think, or VP of safety of DuPont, the big industrial company. And one of his great contributions to safety, and there's several, I really recommend getting his book. It's freely available online, about the safety organization. And he is, I think, the first to pose accident as a process. He didn't picture it, but he discussed accident as a process where you first have causes, then there is an event, and then you have outcome. So he separated these three things, which was, I think, quite groundbreaking at the time, because if you read all the early literature, you see that people mesh accident and outcome, or accident and causes. They mesh them all together, and they're very, what should I say? They're not very careful in describing the distinctions between the things. And of course, they're relative, because you choose what you choose as cause and what you choose as the event and what you choose as the outcome. Then it all depends where you start. If you choose, let me take an example. If I walk down the stairs and I slip and fall, do I start by slipping or do I start by falling? Because that shifts the causes and the effects a bit. It's not the best picture, but yeah.
Yeah. So do you focus on the fall?
But you choose something and then build your model from there. So he has this process thinking, and he had just three. Heinrich enlarged that then into he kept the three phases: the causes, the accident itself, and its consequences, the outcomes. And Heinrich drew it as 5 domino tiles, where the final tile, that was the damage, the injury before it, the accident, the event, the fall, for example. And then you had 3 causal dominoes before it. Direct causes, the stuff happening just before the accident. So if I fall because I slipped, because my shoes were slippery, or there was some banana peel on the stairways or whatever. And then you have he called it not underlying, he called it personal fault, but say the underlying causes, and then you had the real basic causes at, well, the outmost, the first domino. You had 3 causal dominoes: the accident and the outcomes. And that's his domino model. And he said you can prevent the accident. He didn't focus on the outcomes. He said to prevent the accident, you have to prevent the direct causes from happening. So you have to get out that middle tile. And he actually draws first the 5 tiles, and then there's a drawing of a big hand picking out the middle domino, so to prevent the other dominoes of falling.
And what's the criticism of that theory then? Because I don't see much wrong with that.
No, because for simple events, as I said earlier, it's a perfect illustration to describe a cause and effect sequence to people. You don't have to know anything about safety, but you get the toppling dominoes and cause effect, cause effect, cause effect.
And dominoes are used quite dominoes. The idea of a domino is used quite a lot to describe like a tightly coupled system, which was, I remember when someone sent me to a website when I said, what the hell is a tightly coupled system? Went there and I watched this video, and this guy went, a tightly coupled system is dominoes. When one falls, it knocks another. And I was like, that's quite an easy way to think of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, interesting. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
So no. That's a nice digression. One of the things that get criticized for is because of the linearity. Right. Because one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. That in some situations that's how it is, but often stuff is much more complex like that, of course.
Right.
Because also it branches out. Mostly there's some direct thing, but then there are maybe hundreds of reasons why that thing was there. So that's one of the things to criticize him for. And then you could say, why should you focus on the direct cause? Because that's what he seemingly does. He says, take out the direct cause. Well, that's just this thing happening just before something happened. Often human act. There's the link to human error, etc. We have, I don't know when you had your safety education, but when I was educated, I was taught to concentrate on underlying causes because they would have the wider reaching and more basic effect and blah, blah, blah. And direct causes are just the symptoms of something wrong in the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the other main point of criticism.
So they sound quite fair to me, like fair criticism.
Yeah, totally.
So would you say this one wasn't? So would you say this one wasn't so much a case of misinterpretation? This was a case of it maybe his work was right for the time, but now we've evolved on to think wider, or do you think the criticism is unfair?
That's one of the things, and he actually writes this in his work. He says, well, there are of course a wealth of other causes, but if people don't get this basic thinking, why should we bother going more complicated explanations? Let's just let's just do this easy stuff, and it will probably fix 50% of the accident. And this is more or less what he says. Let's first do this. It halves the accidents, and then we can see if we proceed over that.
Wow.
So that's one thing. The other thing is keep in mind his audience, managers, busy people, wanting quick solutions. He presents them with a very neat, systematic model which they can follow, which fixes a lot of problems, and that they are super happy, and they actually can improve with it. Not perfect, but also the workplaces were much more linear at the time. Eric Holnagel writes this a couple of times. He says workplaces in the 20s, 30s, they were much more manual, tractable, etc. So Domino was very appropriate there instead of much more complex. And it's the application. We shouldn't use the Domino model to, well, give me an example, explain the Challenger disaster, for example.
Yeah.
But it may work very well, me running into a door.
I think it's fascinating that he's got the comments on the side, like you said there, that he'd gone, obviously there's a lot more complexity to this, but it's kind of like he's saying, let's do baby steps right now. If you can't understand this, then there's no way I'm going to tell you about the other stuff, which I think is interesting. Is one of the problems that we're not appreciating who his audience was then. When we're criticizing his work, it's safety professionals that are criticizing his work mostly, and that work was not really targeted towards safety professionals. It was targeted towards management who, like you say, extremely busy, not educated in safety. They want a simple answer, a simple solution, because the theory in for all of these is that there is a ratio that could help indicate the potential for something to go wrong, and the dominoes shows us that there is some kind of causal link within the workplace with near misses and stuff. I feel like what he's saying to us, that the theory in its simplest form still works nowadays. It's still like, there is some form of connection to work your way back. It's kind of saying, if you were to kind of reverse engineer an accident, you will find something, because the dominoes kind of says that, and so on and so forth with the triangle. That the problem is that now, I feel like the problem is that, well, I know where I'm trying to go with this, but I didn't want to say the phrase local rationality, because I've stolen it off of you. Actually, I'd never heard of it before until I heard your presentation, and I was trying to say it without saying it. But that, I feel like that is what we're missing here. We're just not taking into account what his work was meant for, if that makes sense.
His work was firstly, I think, help to practical problem solving for managers, for workers, for safety engineers, or safety professionals, as we call them now. Practical tools. He was a practical man.
Within the workplace now, like you say,
he wasn't an academic, even though he taught at universities later in his life. But was just a practical man, grown up, blue collar background, and worked his way up.
I like that. Humble beginnings. I like that. Relatable. So with that kind of in mind, when we're having those, let's say, debates, because they're nice when they're debates, but they often descend into arguments. But when we're talking about this kind of safety 1, safety 2, and we're having these kind of debates, or Heinrich's triangle, like, the debates is good, but I feel like there's a lesson here, and you kind of touched on it there with what you said, like how Eric kind of says in his work that, we have to understand that the workplace has changed, and it was a bit more linear back then, and now it's much more complex. I feel like we lack a bit of a hat tip to some, and that's just the way I kind of do it. A phrase I hear a lot from more reasonable people is, you know, we stand on the shoulder of giants, which I quite like that saying. But, you know, I always think, you know, we can criticize someone's work if we go, you know, a little hat tip to say, actually, you know, you've done really well. So from the safety 1 to safety 2 kind of argument, just using those phrases just for the sake of this conversation, otherwise it gets unbelievably complicated. But to kind of put them into 2 camps, the traditional safety and like a kind of new view or whatever, we sometimes lack that hat tip to say, you know, since 74, since was it 1974, the Health Safety at Work Act came out, you know, since then, when we kind of put all of those acts together, we have seen a massive amount of improvement, especially if you're just looking at like the kind of quantitative kind of data with your fatality rates, for example. We have seen improvements. But when we criticize the kind of previous way we work on safety, or maybe bad safety, we just don't say, great job getting us here, but now we need something else. Like, do you get what I'm trying to say? Like we miss that kind of hat tip a lot of the time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And when you were talking, I was thinking about this book. I don't know if you know it. It's one of the most famous management books, I think. Getting to Yes.
Sorry, say
you've heard about it? Getting to Yes.
Do you know what? You say it's one of the most famous ones, and I haven't heard of it.
Management books. It's about a negotiation in basic.
Okay.
It's a great book, and you will find it probably on every airport bookshop if you get to go to airports ever in the future.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's a million seller, and I really recommend reading it, even though it isn't about safety at all, and it's mostly about negotiation. But we are actually working for a common goal, improvement of safety. But whether you are on the BBS side or safety 2 side or wherever you stand, you should work for the common goal. And one of the key things in this book, Getting to Yes, is find this common goal you have, and that will make your negotiation much easier, because it's easier to understand where you both want to go, and then you will probably find and work out some way to do it together, instead of, okay, we are here and you're there, and well, we are willing to give a bit, and you get to some really weird compromise, or you leave each other and agree to disagree. And I don't think safety 1, safety 2, they don't need to agree to disagree. I think both have to bring something to the table to improve worker safety.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need a simple domino or 5Y or whatever, just to solve a simple problem. And sometimes we have a really complex problem, and then we need STAMP or whatever other model to figure out what's really going on here.
Yeah, I love that. No, I think that's one lesson. I feel like there's 2 lessons we can take out of the work that you've done, and I think that is one of them. It's that common goal. You know, we're all trying to do the same thing here. You know, and if we actually stop bickering with each other, we might actually work out that we've all got something to bring to the table. I feel like the other lesson is kind of trying to address misrepresentation, and I feel like we misrepresent Heinrich. Like from our conversation, I have definitely misrepresented him. You know, I've criticized his work until I heard your presentation and spoke to you today. I would have, you know, been very critical of that stuff, and turns out it's completely not what he's written. And I think we even do this now in more modern work, and and I mentioned the book earlier, and it's fresh in my mind because I've not so long ago read it, because I'm way behind the curve of everyone else. But Sidney Decker's book in Field Guide to Human Error, I felt like behavioral-based safety was misrepresented in there. I felt like we were talking about, I call it good safety and bad safety. I feel like it was bad examples of bad or poorly implemented behavioral-based safety that he was referencing, but calling it behavioral-based safety. And I just felt like, we're not learned our lesson here. We're doing the same thing again, which we're just fueling the argument, fueling the debate by saying anyone that practiced in behavior-based safety was completely wrong because this is what we do. We just go, here's a video of loads of real stupid people doing stupid stuff, and now we need to say, that's your fault, don't you do that. Well, that's not behavior-based safety. That's just a poor implementation of behavior-based safety, in my opinion. So I feel like that's the second lesson we can take away from your work.
Yeah, I like that one very much, and I also like that you take BBS as an example, because last year I've studied quite a lot of the foundational texts for behavior-based safety, and of course we can discuss if Skinnerian psychology really applies to humans, because humans aren't rats and pigeons. But on the other side, we have to admit that we do react to stimulants, so that there's something in it. But I was truly surprised when I read the early work by, for example, Geller, to see how much emphasis he puts on non-behavioral actions. Because he suggests, and Frank Bird, who was probably the first to write an article about behavior-based safety in 1970, he says start with the workplace. And if you go even further back in the beginning of the century, Frederick Taylor, the man we load now for making our workplaces all formalized and best practice, blah, blah, blah. The first thing he came with was invest in the environment, because if you create an environment where people can produce as much as they can, he was for production and efficiency. If you fix the workplace first, they will produce more. So it's quite, because, well, we see Taylor as the big devil of workplaces. He actually was kind of a proto-ergonomist in a way. That's.
I think we see that even now. I think there's a quite a popular video of a certain Mr. Geller and a certain Mr. Conklin on a debate.
I know it. Yeah.
They're saying the same stuff. I am honest, like, this is how I felt. So nobody can tell me I'm wrong because it's my opinion. But when I watched that, I was sitting there and I'm like, you're both saying the same thing, but in different ways, but yet refuse to agree with each other. Like, and I understand that there's a lot going on here. I understand that, I'm not naive to sit here and say, why can't we just sit and agree with each other and the world be a beautiful place? But they're trying to make money, and if their book sells more than it, I get what they're trying to do. Like, I get there's some of that there. I don't think that drives. I'd like to think it doesn't drive them more than the actual, what they're trying to achieve. But it's frustrating when I sit here and I think, we're arguing where BBS will argue, say Scott Keller says it quite a lot. And I say this a lot in the podcast, but Scott Keller says, the environment defines the behaviors, but then Todd will say context kind of drives the behavior. So it's exactly the same. One just calls it environment. One just calls it context. Exactly. And I get so frustrated with it sometimes. And I wonder whether the work you're doing, I know you're currently writing your book, but I wonder whether this is just a thing that we need, is to just stop, understand we're all trying to achieve the same thing, and just have kind of open debates. I think a debate is a good thing. I think we can all grow and criticize each other's work, but do it and from a position of learning, maybe.
Yeah, I totally agree. And at the same time, we must be watchful for practices going the wrong way, because you do have shallow implementations of BBS. You do have misapplications of triangles and whatever, Swiss cheese, and you name it, and the wrong applications of Safety 2 practices are just around the corner. I don't have an example already, but I think it was what's his name, the hop nerd.
Well, I think I know exactly what you're going to talk about, and I think it was actually a conversation between me.
Just culture bit, yeah. The podcast you had, and he says something about just culture, and I think just culture isn't a Safety 2 thing per se, but there you see already applications that that don't have anything to do with just culture as such, as Safety 2 or Safety Differently or Decker presents them, but it's just about organizational justice.
And I think in that same conversation I had with Sam Goodman.
Sam, yeah, that's.
Sorry,
Sam.
I have been quite critical of Professor Geller for one reason. I listened to an interview of him a while ago, and to kind of probably misquote him, ironically, but in a way, he essentially says, my idea around behavior-based safety was the environment defines the behaviors, and we need to consider all the stuff, all the context in the environment, etc., etc. And then he said the phrase that kind of gets to me. And he said, it's not my fault the consultant sold it that way. He said, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a marketer. I'm not a consultant. It's not my fault. They kind of, misinterpreted it and implemented it for a quick buck. And I felt a bit frustrated when I first heard that. And I think you actually emailed me, kind of giving some feedback on it, but
I did. Yeah.
It is frustrating in a way that, and I understand he's only one man and he can't, reach around the world and tell everybody to do it right. And this misinterpretation and these kind of, everything made for good can be used for bad. I understand that, but I just sit there and I just think we're all arguing about behavior-based safety versus new view or Safety 2 or whatever we want to call it, but we're not arguing about behavior-based safety and Safety 2. We're arguing about the poor implementation of behavior-based safety and Safety 2. And I think that was another example from what you were saying in that conversation, because me and Sam spoke for about 3 hours and it was like 8 o'clock at night where I was, and I think I'd already started on the beers.
Yeah, but I share your frustration to a certain degree, because it sounds like Geller is this academic in his ivory tower, and whatever happens out there in the real world, whatever. But I think sure he has some kind of obligation. I think. Then I think this will happen. Let's just be realistic.
Yeah,
if you come up with a great idea, somebody will adopt it, I think, and think, hey, this suits nicely my problem. Let's tweak it a bit and do this, and some really great stuff can come out of that. So you have to be open that people adapt and play with it and change it and so on. Also, all the great ideas that academics come with have to be operationalized. That they have to be translated to the workplace, because if you come with, I think that there's a great merit to the Fram model of Holnagel, for example, but it's all fully complicated. If you stumble, you're not going to do a Fram analysis of the event. Then you go to 5Y or the Dominoes. So this translation is needed, and if you translate, you're going to miss something. And then
Yeah.
it's I think that the problem is, where do you say, okay, now we are really going so far away from the idea that it becomes, that it begins to be bad practice.
Mm.
And BBS has reached some of those stations. And then I think we should act as a profession and say, hello, this is just selling a product, and
Yeah,
this
definitely.
is not good.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I
But
like the way.
I think
Go on.
it's a delicate balance.
Yeah, I like the way you kind of describe it there. Like, if we're talking about, a simple problem, the dominoes or 5 whys might work really well, and it's quick and it's easy, and it's, we can do a simple incident accident investigation, whatever you want to call it. But then for a more complex problem, we might need some more complex thinking, and different systems. I like the way that kind of, you say it much better than me. But whenever anyone kind of says to me, we sometimes get messages from the podcast and say, oh, you've interviewed loads of people, safety 1 and safety 2, which one should I pick? And I'm like, don't limit yourself to one of them. Like, don't pick just one. You've got yourself a buffet here, a beautiful table full of behavior-based safety, compliance-based safety, process safety, but safety differently, safety 2, HOP, all of these different things. Mate, just don't fill your plate with one bit of the buffet. Take loads of little bits here and there. Some bits will work for you and some bits won't. And if it doesn't work, put it back on the table and you get something else.
Yep.
But
Totally agree.
That's my very common common as muck way of describing it. But you put it much nicer.
Yeah.
I would like to finish on one last thing. I'm conscious we've been talking for a very long time. If you've got time, if you haven't, tell me you haven't, and we'll let you go.
Well, I
Oh, you froze.
need to make some coffee.
You need to make some coffee. Love that.
Yeah, it's coffee time here, so
cool. All right, we'll leave that. But the only thing I was going to say is that I think that I would like to finish on it, that the conflict is good. Like, these debates that we have and between all these systems is a good thing for us to have, but maybe we just have to do it with a bit more, to use your phrase, like local rationality to a point. I feel like that would be a good message to essentially finish on.
I think local rationality, it's one of the most important things that I have learned in the past few years. If you try to get in someone else's shoes and try to think, why does it make sense to that person to do that? And whether it's about an incident that has happened, don't be on your high horse and say, well, he should have seen, he should have done, etc. No, but why did it make sense to that person at that moment? And the same also, if you read something, don't think Geller is an idiot, because he probably isn't, because he has this degree in psychology and he's a professor and so on. So he must have done something right, and maybe I can learn something from him. So why would it make sense to him to write stuff like that? And that is what I tried with Heinrich and what I'm trying to do with anything I read now. I think it's a very powerful, and I've also found that it's a very liberating view in the workplace, because I often get the comment, well, those people in the head office, they just don't understand how it is here. And I say, yes, you're right, they don't. And you don't understand how it is for them, because you do actually live in another world than the director. You have these operational problems here and now. The director, he reports, she reports, we have a female director now, she reports to the minister, and she has many other different problems than we have right here and now. And how do we bridge those two worldviews?
I love that. Now that was exactly how I wanted to finish the podcast. So I'm glad I kept you back from your coffee for a few more seconds. if people wanted to hear more from you, I know you got your book coming out, and I know you got your website. Do you want to just give us a little plug into your work, your website, and stuff like that?
Yeah, sure. I have a website, www.mindtherisk.com. There I try to share as much as I can, and often time is short lately, but there's a lot of reviews and recommendations for books. I'll step up a bit in the future. I'm establishing also a Heinrich space there, where I'm going to share some of his work, or at least direct to his work, to make available what's possible legally, and well, link to my thesis and well, podcasts like this.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put the link to your website in the description below so everyone can check it out. I had a look there as well whilst we were prepping for this, and there's a lot of stuff on there. So definitely go
and you can find links to order my books, of course. So
of course, we'll put all the links in the description below. So thank you, Carsten, for coming on the podcast. Fascinating chat.
Yes. Thank you for having me, and well, likewise, it was great. I wasn't even aware that it's almost 2 hours now. So that says something about the quality of our conversation, I think.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah. Okay, peeps, hope you enjoyed that conversation. I thoroughly loved talking to Carsten, and we spoke for a little bit longer than we intended. So it was great. Thank you very much, Carsten, for coming on. If you enjoyed that, give us a share, or go on iTunes. If you're on iTunes, give us a rate and review. We really, really appreciate that. Come follow us on all social medias, LinkedIn, Rebranding Safety, and talk to me on LinkedIn, James McPherson, Facebook, Rebranding Safety, and Twitter, Safety Rebranded, because, you know, Twitter's special. Anyway, thank you for listening. There's been another episode of our Safety 1 and Safety 2 mini-series. We've only got 2 more left after this, and then it's back to normal old Rebranding Safety. Actually, it's back to our new structure of content, which we haven't actually done yet, because we're doing this mini-series. Catch you next week, peeps. Safe.